That's good. Thank you very much. Seeing no other further questions, we want to ask you to please stay at the table. Ms. Howell, we want to invite up Paul Golazinski, who will be representing the Legislative Analyst's Office. Welcome, and we look forward to your presentation.
Good morning. Paul Golazinski with the Legislative Analyst's Office. The committee asked us here today to provide an update on what has happened since the BSA audit was conducted several years ago. So first, I'll talk a little bit about some actions UC has taken in terms of how they distribute state funding to the campuses. This is the rebenching that you've heard about during Ms. Howell's testimony. And then I'll talk a little bit about non-resident tuition revenues and how those are being distributed to the campuses. So to start, as you've heard a little bit, UC has made some changes to the way it's distributing state funding to its campuses. The model is known as rebenching. And what it does is it assigns a weight per student. So it's a weighted student formula, one weight for undergraduates, 2.5 for graduate students, and 5 for health science students, which I think addresses some of the questions some of the members had about health sciences being more expensive. The model distributes most state funding this way. There are some exceptions. San Francisco is not part of the rebenching model, or UC Merced. But most funding is being distributed this way at this time. It's being phased in, as you heard, over a 6-year process. So it's in the 3rd year. So the per student rates are not equal yet. Essentially what UC is trying to do is basically get everyone up to the same rate over the course of 6 years. So there are still variations between the per student rate across campuses for that reason, because it's during implementation. So this only applies to how UC is distributing state funding at the moment. As you've heard, UC allows campuses to keep all of the non-resident tuition revenues, the supplemental non-resident tuition revenues that they generate at the campus level. So I know one thing that the committee was interested in hearing about is what was happening with this revenue stream as well. UC provided us with some data from 2009-10 when the audit occurred, as well as 2013-14, which is the last year of actual data that's available. I think due to some technical difficulties that they were having in getting us the data, we only recently received it, so I don't have a handout for you at this time. We'd be happy to follow up in a week or two with a memo containing the information if you wish.
I'm sorry, can you just repeat your last question? I mean, your last statement?
I was mentioning that we would have had a handout prepared with some of the data, but we only received the information from them yesterday, so we weren't able to prepare one in time. But we could prepare one within the next week or two for you.
That's what I thought you said. Thank you. You can continue.
Based on what they've provided, I have some preliminary comments. We haven't had a lot of time to look at the data. But the results show, as you would expect, that there are variations in how much non-resident tuition revenue is supporting students at different campuses. Specifically, it appears that non-resident tuition revenue is much higher at several of the campuses, including Berkeley, Los Angeles, and San Diego. Campuses with the lowest amount of non-resident tuition revenues per student would include Santa Cruz, Merced, Riverside, and Davis, and Irvine is somewhat in between the
Can I stop you there for a minute?
Mm-hmm.
So what you're saying is that those campuses who receive the lowest amount of per student funding also receive the least amount of revenue from out-of-state and international students?
Generally, it's the same. It's a similar group of campuses. Yes, that's correct. And so the reason for this is that some campuses have more non-resident students than other campuses, obviously. So campuses like Berkeley and Los Angeles that have the most non-resident students generate the most non-resident tuition revenue that stays at that campus. And this other group of campuses that have fewer non-resident tuitions generate less tuition revenue, so they have less revenues per student. The variation is for the number of students. This is for undergraduates. Berkeley has the most currently. They have about 5,400 non-residents. Merced has the fewest. They only have 21. They're a little bit of an outlier. So the next lowest campus would be Santa Cruz, has 387 non-residents. Each non-resident pays $22,000 in additional supplemental tuition on top of the base tuition. So that gives you a sense of the magnitude. Each one of those students is generating that additional $22,000. So when we looked at funding on a per-student basis with non-resident tuition revenues, it appears that Berkeley, for example, is generating something on the order of roughly maybe $5,500 per student with non-resident tuition revenues, whereas some of the campuses with fewer non-residents, such as Santa Cruz, are generating something around $800 per student. So that gives you a sense of the magnitude between them, of the difference between them, that is. The reasons why different campuses have different numbers of non-residents largely probably has to do with their ability to attract non-residents to the campus. There could be other factors as well that the campus chancellors are making in determining how many non-residents to enroll, but that's probably one major factor. So what this means is that funding per student nowadays still is higher at certain campuses than other campuses when you look at both state funding plus the non-resident tuition revenue that's being generated. And there could be different reasons why funding is different across campuses, and we've heard comments about differences in program mix for health sciences. With the state funding, UC is trying to adjust for that by assigning weights to different types of students. But there could be other reasons why funding is different across the campuses as well. So, for instance, faculty salaries may be higher at some of the campuses, such as Berkeley and Los Angeles. The faculty at the campuses may be in different salary markets. So that could be another reason why there are cost differences across the campuses. Based on this data, we think that there are a couple of issues for you to consider here. And the first, as I was just alluding to, is funding per student. Are there reasons why funding per student should vary across campus? And we've heard about differences in costs of programs for health sciences, graduate, undergraduate. And UC is adjusting for that with their state funding model, but not necessarily with the non-resident tuition revenue. And what if some campuses have higher costs than other campuses? What if faculty salaries are higher at some campuses than other campuses? That could be one reason why there might be a justification for differences in funding across campuses. On the flip side, another issue to consider is what incentives are provided if campuses are allowed to keep the non-resident tuition revenues that they generate. If the funding isn't pooled centrally and it's kept at the campus level, that would seem to create an incentive for campuses to enroll more non-residents in order to keep the revenue there. So there's two ways, I think, two sides of the coin that you could look at. And I think another issue for you to consider is how this relates to the way that the state budgets for the university. The state no longer provides UC with a per student funding amount. The state has done that for many, many years. We would provide the money on a per student basis and tell the university, we want you to serve X number of students. And in the last few years, the state has gotten away from that practice. We no longer tell the university how many resident students to serve. So something for you to consider as well as you think about non-resident enrollment at the system is, what are your expectations for resident enrollment? Presumably you care about access to the university for residents. And so as part of the budget process, something our office has recommended is to include a resident enrollment target in the budget, telling the university this is the number of resident students you expect them to serve. Here's the amount of money. If you don't serve this number of students, we will take back some of the money. And that would provide an incentive for them to serve all of the resident students that you wish them to serve. And the state traditionally hasn't done this with non-resident students. We've focused mostly on what we want them to serve in terms of residents, which could be sufficient. If they're serving all of the residents you want them to serve, then maybe it's okay to allow them flexibility with how many non-residents they serve. Or maybe if you are concerned about non-resident enrollment, you could be more prescriptive in that area too and use budget controls to address non-resident enrollment as well. So those are some of the issues that we think that you should consider related to non-resident enrollment and how UC is distributing funding to the campus. As I mentioned earlier, we'd be happy to provide additional analysis moving forward in the next few weeks as we have a little bit more time to digest some of the information we just received.
Thank you very much. I have just a few questions. It's my understanding that you asked for the data from UC at what particular point in time so that you can make your analysis of the data that you received from them to provide us with an accurate report. So when did you request this data?
I believe it was about 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. And we're talking about a report that was done in 2011?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The audit report was issued in July of 2011.
And did you ask for information that, I guess what I'm getting to is that we should have had that information so that you could provide to us an accurate account and we can ask questions based on the data that you would have received. And I'm quite disturbed by that.
Yeah, essentially, we asked for information that would have allowed us to present something somewhat comparable to what was in the Bureau of State Audit analysis. And the university might be able to speak better to why they had some challenges.
What was the reason they gave you as to why the information didn't come forward?
I think they were having some difficulty going back because the non-resident tuition revenues were pooled with some other funds in the past, and I think they were having trouble breaking it out in the past years.
They were having trouble?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. Senator Lara?
Do you know of any other university system, either here in California or across the country, that has enrollment targets for resident students?
Most states traditionally have used enrollment targets in their budget process. Some states recently have moved away from it, but I don't know the exact number, but I would think the majority probably still have enrollment budgeting processes.
So they do have enrollment targets for the resident students of that state?
Correct.
Thank you.
Senator Roth?
Sir, with respect to your suggestion on budgeting and residents on a per-student allocation, how would you suggest we account for the differential cost in the education programs? For example, would you exclude the medical, for example, education programs or the higher cost allied health programs? I mean, it would seem to me that if we allocated based on, we specified a certain number of resident students and budgeted a certain number of dollars per resident student, that would be a little difficult to manage, I think, if I were the University of California president, given the differential cost of programs, or am I, given my math deficiency, missing the boat?
No, I think you're right. In the past, the state has used one number for all types of students with its enrollment budgeting, which, as you suggest, kind of masks cost differences. One thing we've recommended if the state wants to move back towards enrollment budgeting is to try to have a different cost for undergraduates, a different cost for graduates. In the 13-14 state budget, there was language requiring UC to report on the cost of education by student level, so report on how much it costs them to serve undergraduates, how much it costs them to serve graduates, and how much it costs them to serve students in different disciplines. For instance, the traditionally more expensive disciplines like science and technology disciplines. The university was to submit that report last November. They submitted an initial report. However, they reported that they are still trying to work on how to break out the costs for undergraduates, graduates in different disciplines. But once that report is submitted and we have that information, it could serve as the basis to create a new enrollment budgeting model that would take into account different student costs.
Well, the other thing I would caution is that as we go through this process, and we're focused on medical schools because in physician training and recruitment, because we have an underserved area of the state that extends from the north all the way down to the south in the central areas, is a medical school, for example, may try to recruit physicians who have a predisposition to practice in rural areas, and depending on the number of applicants and those who are predisposed to practice in rural areas, frankly, you may take someone from Arizona over the state of California if they're willing to practice in Coachella or desert centers. So, I mean, there are some variations that we need to take into account as we try to formulate a method of budgeting and funding the university based on a per-student formula.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
As far as you could tell, is there any direct connection between rebenching and non-resident enrollment? I mean, in other words, does the UC's attempt to equalize campus allocations offset the need to secure additional revenue from non-resident tuition? Or does it actually increase the need to get non-resident tuition for those campuses that apparently are more expensive somehow?
I think that is a good question to ask the university. It does appear that as funding per student was equalized through rebenching, this other revenue source, non-resident tuition revenue, became more important for certain campuses.
That
it
makes
appears
sense
to be connected
me.
somehow.
I mean, to me, because I'm concerned about the campuses that have less money, particularly because one of them is mine, UC Santa Barbara, is that I would rather have UC Santa Barbara have the money so we can enroll more in-state students, and if the UC has to get that money from more out-of-state students at UC Berkeley or at UCLA, I don't care as much, because as long as I got more seats for in-state students at our campuses. So,
can I make a point, Mr. Williams? But that is only if the UC shares the revenue among the UCs, which is not happening right now.
Right. Senator Ricardo Lara.
Well, it was going to be the exact same point. Is there a way that, because it seems if you look at the numbers, UC Berkeley and UCLA are getting a huge chunk of money, and why not be able to share that non-resident tuition system-wide?
And that's how UC used to do it. They used to pool it centrally, and it was distributed. And then they moved, around the time the audit was occurring, they moved towards allowing campuses to keep the non-resident tuition revenue.
What's your opinion on that?
So, as I mentioned earlier, it does seem like it provides an incentive for some campuses to enroll more non-residents, right, because they get to keep the revenue, whereas in the past it was pooled centrally. I'd also say it may not need to be an either-or. It's possible you could come up with a process where some funds are pooled centrally and the campuses keep some funding to balance these competing concerns.